In 2007, a Czech family adopted a sweet 13-year-old girl named Anna. She was shy, polite, and she came with this tragic backstory. But one night, the family's neighbor picked up on something strange on their baby monitor. And what they saw triggered a police investigation that led to torture, cults, cannibalism, and one of the most disturbing cases in modern European history, which would even go on to inspire the movie Orphan. Let's dive in. It was a warm evening of May 7, 2007, and in the town of Kurim in the Czech Republic, a man named Eduard was sitting in his living room fiddling with the baby monitor. Eduard just became a father several months ago, and so he wanted to keep an eye on his baby daughter while he was watching some TV. And so there he was, sitting in his armchair. Eduard began trying to tune the baby monitor to show him his daughter, who was peacefully sleeping upstairs in the bedroom. Now, one thing you need to know about this man was that he was not really great with gadgets. And so the more he was trying to make it work, the more frustrated he was becoming. But then, all of a sudden, he finally was able to get an image to show on his TV. But his feeling of accomplishment was quickly traded for confusion and pure horror. Eduard was not looking at the image of his own daughter. Instead, he had managed to somehow connect to another baby monitor that was located nearby. And Eduard immediately recognized the person who was in that picture. It was his neighbor's son, and the boy appeared to be lying on the floor. He was not wearing any clothes, and his hands were tied behind his back. There were bars around him, and so it looked like he was confined in this enclosed space, almost like a cage. And it was really obvious that this was not a game. So Eduard wasted no time, and he called immediately 158, which is the number in the Czech Republic for the police. Now, 2 officers arrived very quickly, and so Eduard was still able to show them the image he was able to tune on his TV. Now you might be thinking, this is back in 2007, and so how would a monitor connect to another one if it was not in the same house? But those 2 houses actually shared a wall because they were semi-detached. And so the other monitor was in a pretty close proximity. And as Eduard was trying to make it work at his end, he just happened to connect to the one that turned out to be closer than his own one. After seeing this very disturbing footage, the 2 officers approached the house next door and requested to be let in immediately. They were met with 2 sisters, Klára and Kateřina Mauerová. But when these 2 women were asked about where that footage might be coming from, they insisted that there was no boy in that house. Instead, they claimed that recently, Klára had adopted this 13-year-old girl named Anna, who was very sick, and so they wanted to create a very safe and happy environment for her. But the police officers were not budging. They demanded to be let in immediately because you've got to remember that that footage showed them a very clear sign that a minor could be in immediate danger. You also have to bear in mind that Eduard actually told them that he had recognized the boy, and he was actually the son of Klára next door, and so in the end she had no choice but to let the police in. And they wasted no time. They started going from room to room, looking for any signs of the boy, but they were finding none at first. All they could see was this little girl, that 13-year-old Anna, who was in her pajamas and wearing her glasses, and she was constantly shouting this word that resembled mother. But then one of the officers spotted this mark on the wall that sort of looked out of place. And so he walked over to it, and as he began feeling it with his fingers, he soon realized that that was not just any mark. It was actually an outline of a concealed door. But when the officer tried opening it, it appeared to be locked. But as soon as he pulled on that door, he could hear these muffled screams that were coming clearly from behind it. And what the officers would uncover would keep making headlines across the whole world for decades to come. When the officers requested for the door to be unlocked, Klára said that she did not have the keys to it. So the officers had to call for the firefighters to come and assist them. When they finally managed to open it, it revealed the staircase descending into what was presumably a cellar. So the firefighters flipped on the light switch, and as soon as they descended the first stairs, they were hit with this putrid smell of urine. They could also see this rubbish everywhere. It was practically all over the place, covering the stairs and the floor. And so they were thinking to themselves, what have we just discovered? But then another blow came out of nowhere. Klára and Kateřina leapt onto the officers and they tried attacking them. They were kicking them, they were shouting at them, they were trying to bite them. They were practically doing anything they could so that the men would not descend down the stairs. And so the officers, they had to detain them, and they put handcuffs on them and they tied them up to the radiator so that they could not move and go anywhere. And so after they did all of this, they were really wondering what was down those stairs that these two women were not wanting us to see. And so they braced themselves and continued on down. And when they reached the bottom of the steps, they were able to see that the cellar was actually not one open space. No, it was actually divided into several more rooms, and they were all locked behind a door. So the officers tried opening the first door that was closest to them, and when they did, they were absolutely horrified to find what was behind them. Kneeling on the concrete floor was the same boy they had seen in that footage. He was not wearing any clothes, his hands were still bound behind his back, he was gagged, and he was just staring at them with a complete blank look. In the corner of the room, there was a bucket that obviously the boy was using as his toilet. There was also this empty dog cage, and then around it, still plugged into the wall, was that baby monitor. And it would be exactly this piece of gadget that would, by a complete chance, uncover what was really happening in that house of horror. But as it would turn out, this was just the beginning of a such twisted story that will stretch across several countries and will go down in history as one of the most sensational and evil cases the world would ever know. The officers would soon uncover a second boy who was also locked up in the cellar. And this boy also had signs of abuse. The two women, of which Clara was the mother of the two boys, were immediately taken to jail. Then the two children, together with the adoptive sister Anna, the one that Clara insisted was the only child in the house, were also taken away. Now this wouldn't happen until the 10th of May 2007, so 3 days after they were discovered, and they were placed into the state facility called Klokanek. And this organization is actually a network of facilities across the state that would take in and care for abused, neglected, or abandoned children. And they were particularly popular because they were aiming to provide more of a family-style care. And they also worked to reunite siblings that might have been separated when the state had to interfere in their very difficult family positions. Now, just to explain, as you can see, the logo bears a kangaroo because in translation, the name of this organization would actually be something like a baby kangaroo, so hence the design. But if you thought that this is where the story ended, and we would get a straight explanation as to what was really happening and why, you'd be very wrong. Now, the day after the 3 kids were taken into the facility, the 13-year-old Anna disappeared. Nobody saw her leave, nobody even heard her talking about her wanting to escape. She was just gone. And this was highly unusual. It's not like she had anywhere to go. She didn't have a family she could turn out to for help, and so why on earth would she want to escape? Now the media caught this story pretty quickly, and so the entire country was aware of the missing girl. And everyone began pointing their fingers at the staff of Klokanek, who according to everyone in the public were not able to do what they were there to do. And then you had the organization itself, who were adamant that they had done nothing wrong and that they had no idea how on earth she could have escaped. But little did everyone know that they were not dealing with just any child. And soon enough, the whole world will get to know the truth. But before we get to that part, I would really love if you subscribed and even liked this video if you're enjoying the story. And while you're at it, let me know where in the world you're watching from, because I've never really asked this before, but I would love to know where my stories get to be heard. Now let's get back to it. Now, the real reason why Anna disappeared was much darker and wilder than anyone could have ever imagined. As the facility started to look into her background, they quickly found out that there was actually no trace of her anywhere. No matter how much they tried, they could not find a single information about where Anna was from or where she was before she was adopted by Clara's family. The girl who had disclosed her former surname of Järvinen said that she had been adopted from Norway, but there was just no proof of this anywhere. And so as much as the authorities were trying to piece it all together, Anna recognized that her big secret might be revealed very soon. And so instead of facing the truth that she was actually not this 13-year-old girl she was claiming to be, she decided to escape. Some time went by and Anna made a very quick appearance in Copenhagen in Denmark. She made a brief visit to the Czech embassy over there, but before anyone could get over to her, she vanished once again. Now by that point, everyone was wondering how could a 13-year-old girl with no money or passport travel so far and all on her own? But you've got to remember, nobody still had any idea that her identity was completely made up. And so people were just speculating as to what was really happening with Anna. Her name was in the news all the time, and everyone just really wanted to get to the bottom of this mystery that was growing bigger and bigger by the day. But then came January 8th, 2008. And that day would change everything everyone thought they knew about her. On that day, the police in Norway made a very highly unusual arrest. This was of a 13-year-old boy named Adam who was recently fostered by a family in Norway. Up until that day, he was just attending one of the local schools. But it would turn out that this boy had a crazy story to tell that would not only shock Norway, but would finally provide the much-needed break in the disappearance case of Anna. And here is the story. When Anna was first taken into Klokkanek, she was actually recognized by someone. And that someone accused her of not being this 13-year-old Anna, but they actually said that she was this woman in her 30s, and then she was just pretending to be a kid. Now obviously this was a very wild accusation at the time, but Anna was actually made to provide a DNA sample, and it was exactly this sample that would prove this to be true. Yes, this was a woman in her 30s, and Anna's identity was finally revealed. It was Barbora Skrlova. But before any arrest could be made, she fled the country, and so nobody could find her anywhere. At least not until January 2008. That's when she was living under her new identity, pretending to be a 13-year-old boy. She had shaved her hair, she was binding her breast, and somehow got fostered by a family in Norway. And for 6 months she was going to school and nobody suspected a thing. She was finally apprehended by the police and sent back to Czech, where she would be trialed. And that is exactly when everybody would finally get the whole picture about who Barbora was, how her lies came to be, and what exactly she had done. Barbora was born in 1973 in the Czech Republic, which would make her almost 34 years by the time she was pretending to be Anna. But Barbora was like any other person out there. She actually suffered from this condition called hypopituitarism, which basically meant that her growth was really slowed down, and so she actually could look like a child well into her 30s. Now this condition isn't exactly common, but in Barbora's case, it would become the key to everything that followed from then on. She was also from a family that supported this very shady religious group called the Grail Movement. And when I say shady, I really mean it. Now for years, this group has actually been called a cult more than anything else. And honestly, I could just do an episode entirely on that alone. Now, alongside supporting this group, it was actually Barbora's own father, Josef, who also became the head of a scout group called Mravenci, or Ants in translation. But this was actually supposed to have a cult-like practices as well. There are lots of people that have come forward to say that Josef was this communist leader whom everybody was afraid of, and whatever he said went. And that was not just in terms of leading the kids' camp, it was supposed to go well beyond that. What is also very important to say is the fact that even though many people claim that religion had nothing to do with any of the strict behavior Josef was very much representing, people that were closest to the family and their followers, they all testified that there was a lot more going on than just the regular scout camping trips. And we can see this from Barbora's own letters and notes, where she refers to religion a lot. And she writes these obscure paragraphs, and she has been accused of behaving and being seen as this chosen one who had been burdened with this ordinary mortal body, but is actually here on earth for a more glorious purpose. And this is exactly what she was saying to all of her followers. Now, despite all of this, Barbora was actually never that intelligent. Her IQ was only supposed to be around 99, which is considered very average. But her real talent lay in hearing abilities and memory. Without any trouble, she was able to transport herself into all of these realities that she had created herself. All these words were very rich in detail, and she also had this very quick way of making things up. She could speak multiple languages, and she was very good at playing piano, which is all that really helped her to be accepted into the very prestigious Czech Academy of Performing Arts to study musical composition. And as she was growing, she learned how to be persuasive, charming, soft-spoken, and deeply manipulative, which is exactly what was helping her along the way with her supporters. And during her studies, Barbora met Kateřina Mauerová, and the two became practically inseparable. Kateřina started taking care of her as she was her own child, she answered the calls, and Kateřina even invented this story that Barbora suffered from leukemia and she was actually dying, hence the care for her. Now, Kateřina would even later employ Barbora and even provide her with all these false documents to state that Barbora was this 13-year-old girl from Norway and that she was in need of a new family. She would then introduce her to her sister Clara and her 2 sons, who all lived in that same house together. Now, the boy's father wasn't really in the picture, and so depressed and in a bad place, Clara agreed for her little sister to move in, which in the end would open the doors to the evil woman as well. But at first, Barbora was perfect. She was kind, she was gentle and obedient, and she played her part so well that Clara enrolled her in a school. Neighbors adored her, but what nobody saw and what they couldn't imagine was that Barbora wasn't trying to be part of the family. She was trying to take it over. Now remember, she thought that she was being sent here with a great purpose, and so she wanted to achieve just that. And bit by bit, she was being more persuasive and started making all these people around her do things that they would probably never do themselves. And that counts for a lot, because you've got to remember that she made a mother of two torture her own kids. Now, over time, Clara's behavior started to change. She became erratic, she withdrew from friends, and her sons began missing school. And Anna, the little girl that they had rescued, was always watching. And then, of course, came the baby monitor accident in 2007, and everything came out. During the interrogations and court hearings, it would turn out that the two boys were brutally abused. And there were even moments of cannibalism, which I'm just not gonna go into because all of this is literally like straight from a sick horror movie. Now, the boys also gave confessions, and they confirmed that sometimes Anna would also be locked up in those cages, but they never saw her actually being abused. Barbora would go on to say that she herself was supposed to be a victim, not a perpetrator. She claimed that not only was she abused as much as the boys, but that outside of the house she was being passed from one client to another. But these claims turned out to be not true, because when the doctors examined her, not only did she have no marks of abuse like this would leave, but she was also still a virgin. She did have some minor scars, but they looked self-inflicted, and they were not in any way major or showed that she suffered and experienced a lot of pain. Now, the only thing that could have been somehow seen as torture was the fact that she spent a lot of her time locked away in this small hut, living on almost nothing to be able to shed all this weight and transform her body into the one of a 13-year-old girl. But this was self-inflicted. Barbora wanted to do that to herself. And when she was posing as the boy named Adam, she would shave her head, bind her chest, and overall continued with the strict diet she had started for the role of Anna. And the way she managed to get to Norway was through a friend who was posing as her father, and it was this way that she was able to get to the shelter and then being fostered by a local family. And just like before, she managed to fool everyone, even the teachers at a new school. But then Interpol got involved, and so she tried fleeing, but would be later apprehended and brought back to Czech. And the nation went wild. You had this 33-year-old woman who had fooled schools, shelters, police, and families, and she did this twice. And of course, if this sounds familiar, then it should. This case is what inspired the 2009 horror film Orphan, which is of course the story about this seemingly sweet girl adopted into the family, who turns out to be this full-grown woman with very violent intentions. Back in the Czech Republic, Barbora stood trial, and not just for the identity fraud, but for her role in the torture of the two boys as well. And there's where things got even darker. Prosecutors uncovered disturbing letters and audio tapes between Barbora, Clara, and a third party referred to only as the doctor. And this mysterious figure was to give instructions to Barbora, and apparently he was saying to punish the boys, humiliate them, and break their will. And this is exactly where the Grail movement comes to play an important part. And some people even suggest that the real perpetrator was actually Josef, Barbora's father. But none of this was ever proven, and to this day he's evading the police. The trial, which started on the 17th of June 2008, went on for a bit, and eventually on the 24th of October the same year, so 4 months later, the verdict came. But this is where things would yet again prove to be completely wrong and unfair. The mother of the two boys, Clara, was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Her sister Katerina was given 10. Now, there are a few other people that were sent to prison as well because of their ties to the case, like for example Barbora's own brother Jan Škrla, former scout leader Jan Turek, and Hanna Bašová, who work in the same place with Barbora and Katerina. But as for the mastermind, the one who persuaded the mother and aunt to torture their own kids, Barbora was sentenced to just 5 years in prison. But this isn't everything. She was released early. And then, she just vanished. There have been no photos, no updates, no records. She could be anywhere. Maybe even someone else again. And now, in 2025, all of those horrible people walk the streets free again. As for the boys, they did survive, but of course their childhoods were completely shattered. Apparently, they have been able to put all of this behind and grow up, having friends and somewhat normal life. But who really knows what is still happening inside of their heads? I don't believe for a second that you can ever forget something like this, but I do hope that what they say is true and that they are able to live a normal and happy life. What is really unbelievable is the fact that as he regained their custody, their own father mismanaged their money and ended up illegally using them, and so he himself was sent to prison for 10 months. This meant that the boys had to go on to live with their mother's parents. Now, of course, everybody's wondering what the real monster behind all of this is doing now. Is she still out there trying to follow this chosen path, or has she moved on? I think without proper help, this is very unlikely to happen, and some even say that she's still in touch with her former supporters and followers, and that actually they're still helping her achieve her plan. So who knows, maybe one day she'll make the headlines again. But what I think, people like her, especially the ones that are let out just like nothing has ever happened, they're like a bomb. They will go off. It's just a matter of time. But let me know your thoughts. It's such a wild case, and yet not many people are aware of it. But just because it happened in a very small country, it does not mean that it should not be more widely covered. And especially those 2 boys, their story should not be forgotten. So please do forward this story to at least one person you know. Until next time.